Okay, so the first part is going to be business intelligence. Can we extract any useful intelligence from our underlying data in order to help marketing and sales get more insights into their customers, so that they would be able and then to modify their marketing and sales techniques to achieve more sales, normalize the sales, reduce returns, things like that. So let's have a look at that. We're going to do it in a very visual manner. In reality, this would all be code in production because of performance concerns in reality. As a recap, quickly, we're first loading our data from our file, and we have the invoice date, which is basically the month. Then we have the invoice total, which is numeric, and that's our target, right? We would like to see how we can influence the invoice total. In reality, the higher that is, the better. We have customer ID, a country, which is any one of quite a number actually. The items, which is, as we explained before, either absent if they are not part of the invoice, or have a value of 1 if they are part of the invoice. And down at the very bottom we have just the invoice number, which we are not going to consider for now. Right, so first thing we're going to do is categorize our data. So we have, in particular, we have the invoice total, which is numeric. It can be anything between a negative number, which means the invoice was a return, going up to quite a large number. So we're going to split this into 5 categories: less than 0.5, between 0.5 and 152, and so on and so forth. And we do this to get more intuitive results. One of the first things we're going to do is come up with some exploratory data analysis techniques, right? So we're going to just look at the underlying distribution of our data to see if we can glean any good nuggets of information. However, if we do that directly, so we just open this graph up, we end up with quite a mess over here, something which is quite difficult to analyze visually or manually. As an introduction to this graph, these are the categories. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different categories of our invoice total, so the value of a particular transaction, and it's within every category it's split by color. You can see Malta over there. So we have the distribution of transactions coming from every country. So one of my favorite ways of quickly cutting to the really important information within a mess of data like this is to use something called correspondence analysis. I'm not going to get very mathematical in this video, but you have to imagine that correspondence analysis has plots different dots on a graph, and every dot has a force of attraction towards similar dots. Now every dot represents a category, in our case the country. So similar countries tend to group together, while those which are different for one reason or another tend to stay far away from clusters. So as a prime example, in fact, we can just take Malta. So this is real data, and we have to figure out why Malta is an outlier. This is, and then when we hop back into our messy graph, which is down here. And now we know that specifically we're looking for Malta, which is this dark blue. And having a quick look at, if we hover over the category over here, we see that Malta actually has 50%, you see over there, 0.5, 50% of its transactions in the low value. So 50% of the transactions from Malta tend to be less than 50 cents, or actually all returns, which is quite a massive amount when you think about it. It's definitely not something that you would like. So and it conversely obviously has a very low amount of transactions in the other bins, 10%, and probably another 10% over here. So that is why Malta is quite far out. Let's say it basically has quite a number of transactions which tend to be returns or low value. So that's the very first point we'll put down. Malta tends to have very low value transactions and high number of returns. You can say that that was 50% of transactions. So we can have a couple more examples of this sort of thing. Let's take in case in point Lebanon. Lebanon is also an outlier, and it is almost diametrically opposite to Malta. So given what we already know about Malta, we would expect Lebanon to have a very high number of transactions in the high value bin category. Let's confirm that. So if we hover over the high value one, we see that Lebanon, which is down over there, apologies about the mouse. So Lebanon has 100%. So 100% of the transactions in coming from Lebanon tend to be really high value. So no returns at all from Lebanon, which is another very good piece of business intelligence. So Lebanon tends to have a very high value, transactions and low return rate. So last example, let's take somewhere in the middle. So another outlier, which is sort of stuck in between Lebanon and Malta, so the high value transactions and the low value transactions, is Singapore. So let's have a look at what's going on with Singapore. We would imagine it to be somewhere in the middle, right? Now what the middle means is up to us to determine. So if we look at the ones in the middle, look at the transaction values in the middle, Singapore is actually not represented at all. There's a 0. So there's 0 there, 0 there, and 0 there, which means that Singapore is probably 50% or so. No, so 30% of the transactions from Singapore are either returns or very low value, while 70% is high value transactions. So this is why it was actually an outlier, while the rest of the countries tend to have a roughly equal distribution of transactions among all the different categories that we're looking at. The outliers tend to have a skewed distribution. So now we know that Singapore, you can type down that Singapore tends to have a high value transaction rate, but also a relatively high return rate. So those are our 3 parts of business intelligence that we can do. Now sales and marketing can adjust they might decide, for example, listen, Malta is just costing us too much, 50% of transactions are low or returns, so just let's not bother with them anymore. While we can focus even more, we need to expand our sales team in Lebanon, and listen, we might have some sort of production problem or something in Singapore, because even though there is a high transaction rate, there's also a high return rate. So this gives us an idea of how correspondence analysis works to sort of focus our data analysis. But the real power of this shines through when we plot multiple variables together. So let's try gain even more detailed analysis. I'm going to stick invoice total, so the 5 categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories of transaction value onto the same graph. And now the graph changed again. And we see that these 4 transaction value bins stick together. Let's zoom in a bit over there. And then there's one set apart, which is the greater than 495 sterling transactions. And the reason for that is, I think, pretty obvious. It's because most of the transactions bunch in the higher value basket, let's say, which is good news for the company, right? It means that most of the transactions, just looking at the distribution of the amount of color there is in this bin, that's exactly why it's set apart. But then if we look a bit closer at them, we see, for example, that Australia seems to be pretty close to the high value transactions. And let's have a look at the data as to why that is. So look down again. So Australia, which is the top one, has a good 33% of its transactions in the high value rate, the high value basket. Let's see how it's represented in the others. It's 18%, so 13%, 17%, and 17%. So Australia has a pretty equal amount of representation in the lower value or returns values. However, there is 3 times as many transactions in the high value category, which is why Australia is bunched towards the high value transaction rate. So that's another data insight that we can have. We can say that Australians are very likely to place high value transactions. So they are about 3 times as likely to place a high value transaction when compared to making a low value transactions. And conversely, we can take our last example over here. If we zoom out a bit, so we have Bahrain now, which came out as an outlier, and so now we know that it's continuing with the theme of the rest of the observations. It obviously has something to do with the value of the transactions that is coming out of Bahrain. So if we zoom a bit closer, it seems that Bahrain is pretty. It's an outlier, so it has a weird distribution of transactions, and it is closest to the 0.5 to 512 and 512 to 303. So in other words, there seems to be an abnormal number or a weird distribution of transactions from Bahrain that come between 0.5 and 303 sterling. So let's confirm this. So 0.5 and 303 sterlings are these two categories over here. And if we look at the entry for Bahrain, it is 0.25, so 25% over here, and another 25% over here. And while in the others, Bahrain has another 25% and another 25% over here, which means this should be 0. So Bahrain seems to be one of those few which has an equal amount of representation between all these all these 4. You can see that we said that there was 25% here, 25% there, 25% there, and 25% there, while the rest of the countries have at least some pull towards 495, not Bahrain. So basically we can say that Bahrain tends to make no high value transactions. That would be another point in our business report, and people would need to see why. Bahrain makes no large value transactions. Okay, so those are a couple of examples of business intelligence that we get from our manual data exploration, which already sets us on the right track. Let's get now even more detail. What we would like to do is to come up with a set of, let's call them rules, which help us with customer profiling. And first thing I'm going to have to do over here is, due to the limitations of my machine, I'm going to select only a few rows. So we're going to perform this rule building just for the month of December, for 1 month of the year. And obviously, because we are matching just December, we're not going to bother with asking our machine learning algorithms to see if there is any variance within the invoice date. So we're stripping that out and we're keeping everything else. We're going to pass this through an algorithm called association rules. Again, I'm not going to get very technical, but it basically sees if there is any underlying relationship between the data. And from all these difficult looking numbers, what we're interested in is the lift. In other words, how much is the consequence of a rule likely given an antecedent? So given a set of conditions, how likely is it that we're going to have this consequence, right? So we've sorted by lift. The higher the lift, the better. If we have a quick look at the rules that came out, we're looking at some interesting conditions. Let's say we can see that if a customer bought paper chain kit 50s, I don't know what that is, hot water bottle, I am so poorly, and the rustic charm, then they very, 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 very probably also got a Regency cake stand and another hot water bottle. How is this useful? It's excellent for our online recommendation. So now we know that, just like with Amazon, we know that, listen, if you go and you put into your basket the paper chain kit, the hot water bottle, and the rustic charm, we should definitely also advise the cake stand and another hot water bottle. Similarly, we can go even more into detail, and we say, listen, if the customer is from United Kingdom, definitely show the other recommendations. And we'll have a couple more like them. If the country is the United Kingdom, they bought the chain kit, the silver agents tea light holder, and the toilet roll, then we can advertise these because they are very likely to want them to buy them. And this keeps on going for quite a large number of rules. We would need to sort through a couple of these because there is a lot of repetition. Like like these two rules over here. Country United Kingdom, they bought this set of products, then we should advertise these sets of products. But the only difference between these two rules is the country. And we'll have over here a very basic recommendation system, which we can then give to marketing or to IT so that they know how to advertise. So for example, the hot water bottle I am so poorly is very popular with customers who are who also buy these Christmas looking things with the hot water bottle. And we gain insights like this. So these would be things that we put into our report. A very similar technique is actually using this CN2 rule induction, which does something very similar, but it gives us a bit of a higher level view of things. So we're sorting rules by quality, and higher quality being first, and now these are going towards our sales account managers, because we're saying the very first one over here, we're saying there is we are 69% confident that if a customer is if the customer is not 16013 and not 18102 and not 16029, then the invoice total is actually going to be greater than 495. So we basically need to ask our account managers, listen, why are these three not making high value transactions? And we have similar rules. Another example, I'm looking for the ones which have a very high probability in one particular category. So here we have a 46% chance that if the customer is 12748 and they're in the United Kingdom, then the invoice total is going to be less than 0.5. So we would ask their account manager or marketing to figure out why that is, why they are doing a lot of returns. And we have a bunch of other rules. We see again over here there's a 42% chance that if the country is Germany and the customer is not 12600, then the invoice total is going to be somewhere between 0.5 and 2.49. So either he's doing something really good or really bad, this customer, because either he's returning a lot of money or he's making high value transactions. And we gain all these valuable insights which can give a good amount of insight into our data set, and we could come up with all these different reports where we guide the customer to increase their sales. You know, like Belgium, we can say with 33% confidence that if an order comes in from Belgium, it's going to be between 303 and 495. So what are we doing right in Belgium? You know, that's a model country to follow. And that would end up being our report to marketing, sales, and account managers. And that concludes the first video.